she's recovering from that, and she's sort of reinvented herself, and she starts seeing a sugar baby, Josh, and he's really um, been wonderful in terms of her coming to terms with all of this as well and finding herself, um, and then he goes missing, and she realizes that she had only built a sort of superficial skin, I suppose, and that there's a lot of grief still going on underneath. There's also things going on with her parents being unwell and things like that. And she just throws in everything and goes to Europe to look for him, because she doesn't quite think that it's all as it seems, even though she doesn't also feel that she has the right to know him. She does
Right,
think they
because it's a
became
professional
friends.
relationship. Mhm.
That's right, and she acknowledges that, but she did develop feelings for him. And then at the same time, his housemate and best friend Kyle, he was meant to meet Josh on a Euro trip, like a post COVID lockdowns trip overseas, and he still goes on that trip, but he also starts to realize that he doesn't think it's all clear what happened to Josh. So he and Miller meet up, and it's a sort of sleuth. It has a sleuthing, thriller
Yeah,
element where
yeah.
they're
There's
looking
a
for Josh. And then there's some other strange things going on in the background. And we'll probably, as we speak, I'll reveal some of that, but maybe not all of it, because I think
yes.
part of the fun in reading it is discovering the strangeness as you go. Yeah.
I'll be very careful with the spoilers. There's a lot of strangeness going on, and it's the sleuthing on the surface, then the strangeness that is coming in with a substance that may alter people's perception of themselves, their surroundings, their connections with their surroundings, and that is reflects in a way the way they relate to other human beings. I mean, it's really it's quite deep on that level. And I was going to ask you initially when I started reading, and I'm taking my notes of like why did you choose for Josh, one of the main protagonists, the profession of a sex worker, and obviously relationships and desires, especially from the main female character Mila, are really important, and her realizing that desire is it's legitimate to have those, right? So I find
Yes.
that Angela, before I mansplain to you, no, but I as a feminist ally, I say this in all seriousness. I really enjoy reading books written by women, generally speaking, more so than by men. Although, I mean, maybe I'll take that back because there are some men who are very sensitive to that as well. But the way you
Mm,
describe that kind of, um, yeah, growing up in the patriarchy and then kind of discovering oneself in close to middle age through different relationships, but also through this sex worker is just uh, amazing. Yeah.
thank you. It's definitely a very sex positive book, and I hope also very respectful to the sex work profession, um, through Josh. And I did research and interviews and things like that about that. And Miller, yeah, it is something that just sort of happened, wanting to explore a lot of those themes of how girls are socialized, and how a lot of things, quite by accident, can be repressed by I guess the messages they receive, and then also because everyone around them is sort of socialized in the same way through the relationships that they have, that they may not discover things about their own desires or their own sexuality even, um, until later in life. I
Right.
certainly know people who did not discover that, well, not discover is probably not the right word, but didn't um, explore or understand their queerness in particular until they were older, 30s, 40s. Um, and that's what's happened for Miller. Um, and just other aspects, yeah, just sort of being okay with even having like a sex drive.
Hmm.
That's depending on how you grew up, that can be an issue for some
Right.
women. Um, yeah, just with the messages, the patriarchal messages of sort of that it's the man who initiates um, sex, or that is the one who can express desire, and it's unseemly for the woman to do so. Yeah, all kinds of messages. There's layers and layers of them. um,
There's a lot of
yeah.
comments here. I want to go through them real quick here in the local chat. Shiloh is asking, is this a kind of gigolo who primarily focuses on being a companion sex worker for an older woman who is sometimes referred to as a cougar? I think we clarified that this particular character seems to be specializing on older women. Tsai, who is
Yes.
actually a sex worker here in Second Life, she says sex worker is a container. It can mean anything from sugar baby to stripper to prostitute. The bad part is
Yeah.
that some members of the group like to exclude themselves from it, which undermines the effort for sex workers' labor rights. So that's interesting. There's some division
Very
within
interesting.
which yeah undercuts the solidarity when you try to fight for better working
Right.
conditions and
As a
such.
as a group.
And
Yeah.
Kaa says sugar daddy is equals financial provider, sugar mommy, emotional provider, carer, sugar
Interesting.
baby, be pampered, give others the feel to be needed for caring. Stares at her dictionary. Ah, you got that out of the dictionary.
See, that's interesting. That even divides men and women into, yeah, the sex for men and the emotional labor for women. Whereas I think, from
Very
my understanding,
interesting.
a lot of sugar mamas, it is certainly a sexual um, relationship.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So it seems like in that dictionary definition, it's already the
quite
stereotypes are
gendered.
oozing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have this excerpt here from the book. This sentence: is it sexist to believe that a woman wants intimacy more than pleasure? If Mila pays for sex, this could remove the intimacy and therefore allow her to understand pleasure on its own terms.
Hmm.
That is like
That's
along those same lines where you explore exactly those the stereotypes what generally in our gender normative society people believe that what are the needs of one gender versus the other one, I guess.
that's right. And of course, it is a journey she goes through, and it ends up being not an either or, like everything is always more complicated, and there are gray areas, and we can never completely escape our own socialization either. It's not like we just sort of go, all right, I'm done with the patriarchy. This is sort of embedded in some ways. And it's
Absolutely.
about partly finding our way through, resisting where where it suits us, where we're going as human beings, I suppose, and then parts of it just are there constantly to navigate, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's you hit the nail on the head about the uh the socialization part and the conditioning part, and it's in my opinion really stupid to proclaim the end of just like when Obama became president and then people proclaimed the end of racism. I mean, nothing can be more infantilizing or at the
Yes.
time than also proclaiming the end of patriarchy because Disney has produced two relatively good movies where a princess is not the old stereotype. I'm talking about Frozen, which I haven't seen, but I heard about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, Angela Meyer is here, and we very much appreciate you getting up at this early hour. Please do let put your comments in there and contextualize them. The resistor has a comment that I don't quite understand. Um, Please have that discussion going on here in the local chat, and I will pick it up. Um, Now, Angela, broader question because I mean, today we're talking about sex, and another topic in the book is suicide, which I
Yeah.
also feel you handled really well. And it's interesting because last week I read a story by Charles Yu, um, the the last the only living girl on earth, which is an amazing short story, and it's profoundly sad, and he uses a very long metaphor that is so brilliant. And we had one member of the community say, she can't take it and she had to leave. And I realized
Yeah.
later that, to me, the story deals with loss and everything, and I felt the sadness of the story, but I did not anticipate that someone who may have, complete speculation on the part of this person who left, maybe that person has experienced the loss of a child, let's say, or something, and that person was triggered, as we say today. How do you feel in general about trigger warnings
Mm.
before events and in books or other media? What's
Yeah, I
your
think my
opinion?
opinion is always evolving. Um, I I used to be really um, firm about, things. I used to say, surely, people can handle things or whatever. But then I experienced some trauma myself, and it became clear to me. And Penelope's just coming in, by the way, if you're hearing other noises in the background. Um,
Penelope is
that
the little child, and we actually, if the camera could zoom real quick, we also have the virtual version of
Hey, Papa.
Penelope. We welcome Penelope here in Second Life
Sweetie.
and in real
Oh,
life. It's
sweetie.
Angela's 4-month-old daughter.
Yeah, she is a very cute little baby, and I love that you've got her in Second Life here as well. Um, so now I've got to pick up my thread. Hang on.
The evolving thought on trigger
Yeah.
warnings, the importance, or are we, overdoing it?
Yes.
Should we be able to handle what's up with resilience? Oh my God, the kids these days, they start crying, blah 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 blah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess yeah, after my dad was very sick and died from cancer, what actually today, 3 years ago, and I was present for the whole experience of his dying. And after that, even to see on TV, someone who was made up to look sick with cancer and was dying, like it was
Right.
absolutely triggering for me in a very physical, yeah, visceral kind of way. Um, and so I really understood it better. And I do, I'm of the opinion that it can't hurt, to give a trigger warning, because then anyone who wants to excuse themselves from the media, um, whether it's a book or a TV show or whatever, then they're welcome to do that.
Right.
Um, so I don't think it hurts at all. Um,
That's pretty much my
uh,
opinion. I actually think
yeah,
I agree with you, because I think, it's in that area of, the it's a in a way, people sometimes say, oh, these people who want trigger warnings on everything, they can't handle it, they should learn how to handle it, and they're also somewhat intolerant, and that gets thrown around. But I find it fairly intolerant to uh accuse someone of, how should I put this? It's a dictatorship. The people who cry dictatorship by warning labels on everything and reducing freedoms are themselves creating a very unfree world that
yes,
dictates people with trauma to adhere by their norms, right? So they,
they are, yeah.
it's kind of like they're forcing people who experience trauma to be unfree, um to be unsafe in a way, and that it means basically not free in
And
their
yeah,
expression.
it's an insensitivity. It's like if it doesn't hurt to put, if it takes just 1 minute to put a warning at the beginning of something,
Yeah.
it is insensitive to just go, no, I'm not going to do that. They can they can suffer once they encounter this. And there are some, like, there's a lot of people in my life who've been through very significant events, and some things like my dad's passing, like, personally, it it does ease over time. It's the grief, but not the immediacy of the trauma around the actual event. That does sort of fade over time, though the grief is still present,
Yeah.
but there are other kinds of trauma, of course, that people experience in childhood or around sudden death and all kinds of awful things, and that is, it's much, I can understand that's a lifelong thing that you carry. You don't just get over it. You
I think
hopefully
in a
get
way,
through it and can live with it in a way, but
yeah.
yeah, it's still, you still might want to know if you're encountering a text that has something that might trigger. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting. I think it also plays into, I mean, coming back to your book where people explore their sexuality and they go a little bit beyond the norms of behavior that they were conditioned with growing up, how to behave with their specific gender and also their roles, maybe whatever job comes with a certain behavior within a certain context, and they're
Hmm.
exploring that. I also believe that the people who are so incensed by common sense trigger warnings and other things, also I think feel threatened in their gender norms in a way, especially men, where they go
Yeah.
like, I don't need that. I'm hardcore. You know what? I only take cold showers and I wear a gun to the toilet or whatever.
Yeah. And
So
all I eat is meat, or something.
yes. Now you spoke of your dad, and Shyla is preparing slides here for the program,
Mhm.
and she pulled this quote from a recent interview, and I worked separately with my feedback on the book, and I have a question about this. But you
Mhm.
said in this other interview, I was flying back from a trip overseas, and at the time my dad was very ill, and on the dark plane, sleepless and wrecked with anticipatory grief, something bloomed inside me that I can't quite describe. It was a
Mm.
sensation of love and gratefulness, even amid difficulty, and it's something that helped carry me through the years and challenges to come and the writing of this novel. Um,
Yeah.
this is a wonderful sentiment, and I want to now put up a quote, an excerpt from the book, where Mila responds to her dad calling her when she's overseas, and her parents are sick in the novel, and the dad calls her, and Mila responds like this. Responding to the call, she says, reflecting on the call, normally this would twist her up that he calls her and sort of checks in on her, right? I mean, an adult
Mm.
woman, even make her react in a kind of cranky, pressured way, but she doesn't have any of those feelings now in the park. She can see the poor sentiment of what her father has said is just that he is not trying to lure her back, that he simply truly misses her. And talk a little bit about that relationship as an adult with your parents, because this resonated with me.
Mm.
This is the beauty of books. Books may have been written with a certain scenario in mind and certain subtext, and then readers pick it up and infuse it with their own subtext. I have a much better relationship with my father. My mother passed away a long time ago, but
Mm.
what drives me crazy now that we're closer in physical proximity to my dad, being in Germany back from the U.S., is that when I visit him, he says, "Oh yeah, when you come home, then call me so that you arrived home safely."
Mhm.
And I actually feel proud of myself that I'm not responding to this, "Dad, I'm 52. I'm not gonna call you when I
Mhm.
arrive home or send you a text because I'm not 12 years old anymore." I don't say that. I sent him the text,
Yeah.
and so talk a little bit about this, because this is obviously a universal experience, I think, for most. How do you deal with the fact that that your parents will always treat you as a child. And now you have a 4-month-old, you'll be the same.
I know, and my dad always would say things like, "You will understand when you have children," and it's like I can just already see myself absolutely that he was right, and I'll do so many of the same things that annoyed me about how I was parented. Um, but yeah, I think, there was a lot of residual stuff, as there is in any family, to
Yeah.
deal with, once we were adults. And that sort of teenage frustration that you have sort of lingers a lot longer than you necessarily want it to, that sort of annoyance often at your parents, and
Yeah.
um, whether they're calling you enough or not enough, or, you
Or
can
they
kind of go
acknowledge
through
what you
different
do, let's
phases.
say, if you don't have a sort of a
Yes,
quote unquote regular 9 to 5 type profession, right? That they
that's
acknowledge
right.
what you're doing.
Yeah, or
Hmm.
or relationships, like,
Oh
I
yeah.
remember when I went through a breakup and they were like, "Oh," you almost felt a bit ashamed that, that hadn't worked out because my parents, got married, stayed together, blah, blah, blah. Um, and yeah, a lot of things, but, I think luckily, in the years before my dad passed, I did therapy, let's just be honest about it. And that was extremely helpful in sort of um, getting to the other side of a lot of feelings and not being the child anymore, and kind of being able to be more equal and be more, I don't know what the right word is, be more warm and open, and yeah, like you say, sending the text, not being like, "Oh, I don't need to
Yeah,
do
not
that."
not not
Um,
seeing everything as
caring
kind
for
of
them
a confrontation, basically, in a
and
way,
seeing their
right?
needs, I guess, seeing their
Hmm.
needs and being able to accept their needs and not have to be parented anymore, and just be like, I can look after them as well. And then, well, quite physically having to do that when he was sick. Um, and but being in a good place with that and being proud to do that and being feeling actually quite privileged to have such a close and intimate relationship, because looking after someone when they're dying, I hope this isn't a bad trigger for anyone, I'm sorry if it is. It is obviously one of the most intense things that you would ever go through,
Yeah.
but it is also, yeah, it has this intimacy to it as well. It's very the whole world around you, well, it shrinks down, and then it shrunk down, further in the years to follow, but it also comes into relief. Like, there is this sort of hypercolor thing that happens around death and around grief. Um, it's too minimal, it's minimizing it too much, and too cliched to just say that you appreciate life more. It's
Yeah.
not just that. It's sort of, um, you can see things in micro. Like, I spent days just staring at this hair on my dad's chin that had overgrown, just stuff like that.
This is
Um,
interesting. This ties in with the novel. I mean, again,
it
not to
does.
spoil
Yeah.
anything, but the characters, they, let's just say, they have an interaction with something, and their perception is heightened, and it's
Yes.
fascinating. We're kind of awash in superhero movies and people with all sorts of things and telekinetic powers and whatnot, and you do something that is very, very different. The way you describe it, it's a way to be closer with your surroundings almost. I mean, again, I don't want to be too concrete here to avoid spoilers, but I found fascinating how you describe this transformation of the characters,
Mm.
almost like you're describing now when you're together with someone and you do end of life care.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it definitely came from that. And then um, also, I guess, just a desire to write something in which um, the 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 border between the real and the other other
Hmm.
realms. I don't know how to describe it. Obviously, there's a few ways in the book that it's described. Becomes more blurry, um, and then that this is, yeah, a really significant part of a really significant transformation for the characters as well, and they wonder what good can come of it. And actually, it's different than my previous novel, A Superior Spectre, in that this book has actually a lot of kind of hope and um, positive kind of feelings. You know, like I hope that with this one, people will sort of put it down and feel energized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a
Um,
very hopeful, positive. I have a question in a little bit about that because one of the things about the role of billionaires is interesting.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It has a sense of humor as well through. um,
Now, one comment here,
yeah.
real quick, before I lose it. Tsai is saying here with parents and kids. Tsai is saying it's a big problem. I feel my parents are slowly becoming my children, but they won't lose their idea that they have the parenting role. So,
Yes,
yeah, it's a
yes.
give and take in that thing, right? I mean, give a little, take
Hmm.
a little, and vice versa. Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah, it is. Yep. And it is like, yeah, it's so interesting when they become older and if they're ill or if they just becoming more frail. And yeah, like you do just go into the role of being their carer. And
Mhm.
yeah, and yet you're still, yeah, you're always their child. And, you know, um, it's suddenly this two-way thing, yeah, where you're caring for each other.
Shiloh is asking here, when you refer to sex worker and the exploration of sexuality of the older women, is it akin to 50 Shades of Grey? I can say no. Well,
No,
I just in terms of
there's,
of the lack of literary quality of the mention of this terrible book. I'm sorry, this is my opinion. But Shiloh, this is a good question because she wants to know a little bit more what you mean by exploration of sexuality. And she says, do you express the sexual feelings she has more introspectively, which is more satisfying for the lead character, which provides more growth for the characters? I guess then, yeah, the question is like, what do you mean by exploration? Just
yeah,
tell us a little bit of Mila's journey, maybe, and how that is expressed.
sure, yeah. So she, I guess so partly it is her sexuality, as in her ability to express and act on her own desires, and figure out what they are. And part of it is also her queerness. She's always been attracted to women, but never really pursued it or allowed herself to do so. And Josh as well is. Hang on one second. I'm just gonna hand little sleepy baby back to her daddy.
And in the meantime, I'm going to put up this quote here from the book, this excerpt, where she wonders and looks at Josh again, the sugar baby, the escort. She wonders, how do people like Josh slip into their identities? Because he's not only he
Mm.
does not only have older women as clients, he also has relationship with men
Yeah,
and and all over the spectrum. And she wonders here in this section where she watches him sleeping, choose them, live them boldly. He seems so happy, so at home with himself, she thinks as she watches the rise and fall of his sleeping chest. So
yeah.
on
So
on a
Josh,
very basic level, Mila is just has never been allowed her by herself and by others, but primarily also by herself
yeah,
to explore who she is, and again, like I said earlier, express a desire, initiate sex. And there's several scenes where where the women are very confident,
yeah,
and she's not. So that's her
yeah,
journey.
yeah. And so yeah, with Josh, because he's very openly queer and really inhabits this queerness, like her being around that is also helps her to embrace her own queerness. But I was careful to ensure it wasn't like he was doing all this emotional labor for her, on top of, you know, what she's paying him for, the sex. But they do develop a genuine friendship, so they sort of hang out a bit and go through this. We can say this much because it's near the start. This experiment together, where they're both being paid, and yeah, I think that's sort of covers it. So yeah, like her discovery of her sexuality is sort of multi-layered, and it happens all throughout the book. And there's also, just as she is sort of coming further into herself, there are all these other realms that open, like we've talked about, the one where she's kinder and more accepting of her parents.
Yeah.
There's also friendship, just the ability to form um, closer friendships with people, and to see friendships she already has in a different light. Um, she has a good friend who has a child, and she's been, I guess, jealous in a sense, and so there's been a block there for her. But and this is just a little bit in the background of the novel, but as it goes on, she realizes it's a two-way street, and she needs to reach out more to this friend as well. So everything, all the relationships in her life through this experience, she becomes more connected, more
And
intimate with them.
and that connected, exactly. And then, and the sex, or the fact that she chose to pay for sex and decouple it and make it, I don't know, neutral, to explore these things, then leads her back to a connection on all these levels that you just mentioned.
Yes.
Real quick comment here. I put up this little excerpt where Josh says, the escort, he has always thought a slight teasing never hurt anybody. To be in a state of physical anticipation is to be in a state of hope. To fantasize is to be comforted and transported. We are here in Second Life, the universe of fantasies. Talk a
Hmm.
little bit about the importance of fantasies. I mean, I could go on about this for hours. It ties in also with fantasy, imagination, whatever you call it. It's so extremely vital in every aspect of our lives, to move
Yes.
us forward. And we live in a world that is conditioned us to believe that it's a waste of time to imagine. I mean, I'm painting it with very broad brush, but
Hmm.
we all know the mantra of get your head out of the clouds, right? That
Mm.
kind of thing. And yeah, talk a little bit about the importance of fantasy here
Yeah,
in.
thank you. I'm glad you pulled out those lines. I was quite proud of those. I think that it's among my favorite in the book,
Mhm.
um, because I mean, it's partly, like, in that context, of course, is to do with sexual fantasy, and just that relates back to Miller as well, and that allowing her mind to open to the things that she truly desires, um, is opens her on all other levels. And Josh, as a character who's more advanced in this sense, even though he's much younger, but who is inhabits himself and his sexuality. So he has this sort of thought, um, that fantasy is a kind of hope and an opening, and so he already knows these things. Um, and of course, writing books is a kind of fantasy, and as we can see from what I've said already, I'm exploring um, through quite a fun and pacey, multi-genre book, with a lot of fantastical elements. I'm exploring some very real things from my own life as well, grief, and um, the actual storyline of Miller not being sure if she would have children. Well, now that actually came a little bit
Mhm.
from my life as well. Just I'm nearing 40 now, and I'm not sure it was going to happen, and now I have my beautiful tiny baby. But yeah, there's so many genuine, um, raw, and concrete kind of things that are pushed out and explored in this fantastical way. And I think, um, it is vital, it is essential that we can imagine, um, that we have space, to explore different versions of ourself. Um, because yeah, that can lead us to grow into and inhabit these different versions of ourselves, or to accept that we have multiple selves as well, and that we don't have to push them all down. We can kind of, yeah, live as all of the multiple things that we are. Um,
And
that
fantasy does
bring
not necessarily mean that you want to live this out in real life. I'm just thinking of 50 Shades of
no,
Grey.
no,
And again,
no,
I
but
mean, I mentioned like I hope, Shiloh, I didn't mean to disrespect you, but as a literary snob, Shiloh, this book, you got to pay me a lot of money if you want me to read it. Just like every time I go by Ayn Rand and I go like, yeah, I should really check out why this loon is so influential in U.S. politics and all over the world. And then I read two sentences and I go like, no, I don't have the time. Um, but in Fifty Shades of Grey, there's a certain type of sex depicted here. When you have these fantasies of that involve violence to some extent, it doesn't mean that you necessarily
yeah,
want to live this out in real life. I mean, there's a huge discussion in Second Life that I've been on many panels where people have challenged me and pushed at me like, oh, this stuff is absolute perversion, and that it makes people into crazy people. What is possible here and what they then do, and my argument is always, I don't know. It's a complicated question, but just because somebody is expressing mm, certain fantasies is
mm,
not necessarily mean they want to port that into reality. And I can hear in my head already somebody pushing back at me saying, okay, if somebody writes on Facebook they're going to shoot up a school, um, what do you want the authorities to do? And I would say, well, that's a clear-cut case where we do need to be careful and
mm.
take that kind of public threat seriously. But that's different from somebody living out a fantasy in a consensual way, in a way, right?
Yes, yeah, and consent is really, really central to what you're talking about if it's being explored with other people. Um, but I think there's also just the yeah, I guess the private realm of fantasy that we all have, and then that might be opened up by books or films or yeah, games or online. And I think a lot of people um, do sort of struggle to come to terms with maybe even like accepting and exploring private um, realms, and to do so. I mean, this is just Freudian stuff, really, isn't it? When I hear myself speaking, I'm
Yeah.
like, uh, I forget the exact terms, but is unlocking, and maybe some people in the audience will remember, um, unrepressing things, is healthy. Yeah,
Mm.
and it
Hmm.
helps us to form our full healthy selves in the world. Um,
I
and
picked up a term
yeah.
here, and sorry, I'm going 180 degrees to a term here that has
Mhm.
nothing to do with fantasies, but it's hilarious. The organization that is depicted in the book, or their mission statement, or the way they present themselves,
Mm.
you're right. Those words sound like something that would come out of the mouth of a hippie boomer stoner. That's hilarious. A hippie boomer stoner. So that's
Well,
all
that's
three strikes.
that's kind of I don't think any of my parents' friends will be watching this, but some of my parents' friends know. I mean, they grew up in they came of age in the 70s and
Yeah.
in regional Australia, and what else did you do that get high and go to the beach? And some of them are just still that exact person. So, you know,
Well, I grew up in I grew up. I when I moved to America, we lived in the Monterey Bay area, and when you
Mm.
went up to the Santa Cruz area, you would find hippie boomer stoners, and
Yeah.
it was hilarious. And some of these hippie boomer stoners, they became hippie boomer stoner capitalists, and they had like
Yes.
really, exclusive shops on the boardwalk, and they would be the ones who would complain about their former hippie boomer stoner friends who were now homeless because capitalism is
Mm.
brutal, and they would camp out in front of their store, and they would call the cops on their friends and say, can you please remove that homeless man? I need to sell my overpriced hippie reminiscent whatever I sell on the
That
boardwalk.
sounds so familiar. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
That
there's the
scene, oh
ones that
God.
have their multiple properties, and then there's, yeah,
Yeah.
the ones that are on, benefits and,
Yep.
yeah, the divide,
Some were
became
able to
apparent. Yeah.
commodify the look and monetize it, and
Yeah.
others are wearing the look and are suffering. And there's very little
Mhm.
solidarity between these two former allies when they were
Yes.
passing around the joint in the circle
That's
in the
right.
70s.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
One of the interesting things is that I picked up immediately, and Shyla as well, preparing for this, is the fact that you referenced the pandemic.
Mm.
Very subtly, I think that's really interesting because we had a lot of authors that have expressed they're staying away from it. I think it's brilliant how you're weaving it in. My personal opinion is that the pandemic was and is a incredible significant event where we
Mhm.
don't even know the physical and the psychological repercussions. I just heard a story about people who here on German public radio about people who are so psychologically scarred that they cannot they became complete introverts. They're not going outside anymore at all. So the
Yeah.
impact, and they're talking also about young kids who that was their formative experience, just like for my generation in Germany was Chernobyl,
Yeah.
nuclear accident, and it informs your outlook. So you weave that in. Talk a little bit about the decision of weaving in that the pandemic, nobody forced you to, um, but you did it, and I wonder if people advised against it, or how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I just felt like if I was as I was writing, I realized it was contemporary set, and I thought I just there's no way I'm going to deny that this enormous thing happened to all of us. Um and then as the themes of the novel emerged, and it also became about trying to find some kind of ways to be intimate with the world despite or alongside all of the tragedy and drama and difficulty that we experience individually, but also as a whole, as a collective. And also climate change, of course, comes into that. The huge challenges we have coming to face. um, so, and already actually, so many places in the world we're already experiencing the effects of climate change. Um, so the pandemic, just I wanted to face it and not shy away from it, and so it's sort of set. It's sort of set this year, like, well, now around this time. But of course, finished writing it um, last year or the beginning of last year. So it was difficult to know how many marks to put in, and things about variants and things like that. So
Mm,
it is a little vague at times. It's people who have come through, as we did in Melbourne, the longest lockdown in the world. Um, and so there are, of course, some effects from that. Um, and they are newly kind of going back out into the world and going overseas, and they're thinking about things like the history of places and all the different traumas that have occurred in place over time, and becoming more attuned to that. Um, and yeah, I personally am not sure when I will travel overseas again yet. I'm
yeah.
still um, I've had COVID twice, and I know that, and it seems like a lot of people don't want to think about the fact that it can cause long term disability as well, because it's
Yep.
not the same as other viral illnesses. And I do think about that a lot, and I find it pretty scary, um, and would like to avoid getting it again. But also, yeah, there's this thought that everyone is just getting on as normal, and workplaces, I'm back at work as well, and workplaces just don't have any much, um, in place anymore to just help you avoid getting it, really.
Absolutely. It's
Uh,
hugely problematic,
mm,
and the pressure, again, this is a topic in and of itself. I also find really that the social cohesion is, I mean, that's been fractured, in my opinion, continuously fractured
yes.
over a long period of time. But the way that public administrators have handled communication around COVID has further, and again, it's not easy, it's difficult. I'm not saying that I would have, if I were in a position of some sort of national leadership or something, that I would have made the right decisions all the time and communicated them well. But I, for example, felt that specifically in Germany when the government said, okay, well, you don't need to wear masks on public transport anymore. I thought that was a huge mistake. And there were
Yep.
people who were so fragile and afraid. And you can see, because I ride the train daily, you could see that the people who were the anti-maskers were emboldened by this messaging,
Yep.
and they were looking at people who would still wear their mask in the subway with a kind of kind of glee that
I
was,
know. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
terrible.
It's the same here. Like, we had such strict rules, and then it was just a total spin around, and like now no one has to wear a mask anywhere. And a lot of people obviously still choose to wear them on public transport. But the thing about masks is it has to be everyone wearing them, really, to be fully protected. You're only
Yeah.
protecting yourself part way if you're the one wearing it. And that happened to me because I wore a mask all through my pregnancy, even when I was teaching. Um, and no, but other people weren't required to, and I still got COVID when I was pregnant, and that was a bit scary. Um,
Damn,
and
yeah.
yeah, and because the mask, yeah, it only protects you part way. So unless we have, yeah, the sort of the rules meaning everyone should wear them, then people are going to get it regardless of how well they try to protect themselves if they're going out in public. And um, yeah, this is just a whole new, like, an ongoing um, thing that a lot of people with disability or people who are more vulnerable
Yep.
um, are having to deal with ongoing. And then there are other people who are just completely getting on with their lives and not even thinking about the fact that we're still in a
This
pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, this could have been an incredible opportunity
Opportunity. Yeah.
for learning again, solidarity, and really,
Yeah. Yeah.
putting your money where your mouth is in terms of, we are a collective here as a society, and we're not throwing grandma overboard just because there's not enough lifeboats. We're keeping we're keeping grandma
Yeah.
safe, so to speak.
Yeah.
And no, and it seemed to me that the opposite has taken. I mean, you saw good stuff too, of course,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, it accelerated the sort of individualism and feeling that there is really
Oh,
nobody who
it's
who takes care of you at all in a crisis.
It's 100%, and I think it really, the way that we've just bounced back to kind of how it was before in terms of, like, the way society runs,
Yeah.
it does not bode well for climate change. It really
Oh,
doesn't. Like,
absolute. That's a great
it
point, because if you look at this as a
it's very
trial
scary.
run for for how
Yeah.
people would behave in a real crisis, then it you're absolutely right.
It's definitely, and I know this is gonna fuel some of my writing to come, but there will be the exact same thing where a lot of people just push on and get on with things and ignore what's happening and look after their own. And then there will be a lot of others who form communities and collectives and look after each other, but they won't always have the resources to, because the selfish individualist ones are off taking care of themselves. So
Well, that
yeah,
is
I
my
think that.
right, Angela. I worked hard for
Mm,
my right to be egotistical narcissist or a
mm,
narcissistic
mm,
egotist. Take your
yeah,
pick. You have.
scary. Hmm.
Let's do one more reading, and we want to be we
Sure.
have to be very tight today. I'm reminding myself because uh, when we have a good conversation about great books with a full house, and we had some latecomers here and some new people, Vilvi, Keisha, and Miss Sweet, Sandalwood, Jamunky. Welcome, everybody. We're here with Angela Meyer, and the book is Moon Sugar. Maybe it's about cocaine that somebody left on the moon. I don't know what it is about.
Look,
Uh,
it's supposed to the title, when I thought of it, I was like, "That sounds like a drug, doesn't it?" And I kind
Well,
of
there are
thought
drugs. I
that
mean,
that was
the
very
trigger
suitable.
warning
Yeah.
for me as a teetotaler, for me as a conservative teetotaler, there's so much triggering going on. I mean, people in
Oh, sorry.
Berlin, they take drugs. Uh, but actually, as you're going up to the lectern, and the lectern will also magically adjust itself to you. Let me also mention that what is kind of cool, we mentioned at the beginning, is that on the surface, in terms of also pacing, and it's genre bending, but there's a thriller element which is really compelling, and there is sort of you know really cool, great backdrops of major European cities: Budapest,
Yeah.
Berlin, Prague, and then of course Little Melbourne, London,
Yeah.
of course. And if the camera, I don't know if the camera can pan here behind us. I just put a bunch of photos here. Here's a Kafka sculpture in Prague, a very modern one, very cool.
I love Kafka, yeah, and I love Prague.
And
If
also
I
these,
was going back overseas one day, I'm sure that I would go back there.
and then these baths you mentioned. I think, are these in Budapest? You mentioned
Yeah,
these
the
baths.
Budapest baths, yeah, yep. So
There's
they were all places that I have, traveled to in the past, and I guess that was another interesting aspect of writing this through the lockdowns, where I physically, could not travel, but I was mentally, there we talk about imagination again, I was
Yeah.
mentally traveling through writing this book back to these places, yeah.
Now this second read, I let you set it up because people have accused me of spoil. I think I'm getting really good at not spoiling things. But where are we in the book? Set up the scene for us, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to read, so they're in, Berlin, Miller and Kyle, and they are sort of sleuthing. So they're on their journey, looking for Josh and what might have really happened. And
At this point, people
they're
believe
going to
that
a club
he
in this scene.
committed suicide and he was going into the Spree River.
Yeah.
And Kyle, his roommate, and Mila, the client, they decide to, yeah, get together and find what really happened, because they actually
Yes.
think that his email note is really weird. It's not in his tone, so they think something is going on.
Yeah, and so in this scene, also, Mila has just gotten right to the edge of her anxiety, and she's gone and scored some drugs in the park in Berlin. And so they're going to a club, and she's convinced Kyle that they can go and ask more questions because this is where Josh went also before he died. She also just seems to need to have this release of taking drugs. So I'm going to read a little bit from this scene. And I'm sorry, I hope it isn't too triggering, and sorry
No,
about
no,
that,
no.
Drax.
I'm
Um,
halfway joking, but I'm
yeah,
and this is not about me. This is about you and your work. But I
but yeah, I guess
I
it has the feeling of taking drugs, if that is going to affect anyone. Yeah.
I was like, damn, she goes out there, she buys illegal drugs and stuff. Okay.
Okay, so reading now. They arrive at Mesmer after Kyle managed to charm Belle, the bartender at De Lamp, to find out where Josh would go following their bar hangouts. Miller was too high to be self conscious about Belle's barbs over her being Josh's aunt this time. Standing in line at the club, Miller pumps her shoulders, wrists, her smile cracking her underused cheeks. She cannot wait to be inside, to be subsumed by music. Instead of the drug covering up or distracting from the black hole, there's this effect where the emptiness is incorporated in her mood. It's less isolated, more expansive and profound. She has a sense of the clothing, hair, and skin around her, the strands, the seams, the points, the beads, each hard bead requesting to be finger tipped and fondled, each button and zip obscenely superficial, but also among the great deteriorating material of earth. She looks at Kyle, the good sport Kyle, with his frown and shrug, only two beers down, refusing to look back at her. She admires the frown because of the calculations it speaks of. She can feed him ideas and he will then separate out and connect all that is relevant, and his mind won't stop working until he achieves this. She remembers that not so long ago that was her, how she operated. The satisfaction of creating perfect 30 and 45-minute workouts that used every muscle group, spreadsheets of work balance and projected earnings. He too could lose the ability, and one day he may want to. I can see how your brain works, Kyle, she says. He nods, non-committal to conversing. She knows he thinks she is out of her mind, that he doesn't know which words to take notice of. I'm not a baby, she says. I know, he says, but you are vulnerable right now. So I can see his mind, and perhaps he can see my black hole, she thinks. And this sets off a fresh euphoric rush. With the Coke, she doesn't have the usual secondary thoughts, the negative overlay where doubt is added to what she just thought or felt. What? He says. She's staring at him. You're great. You're high. When they go through the doors, the music sets goosebumps on her skin. Her nipples go hard under her slippery teal singlet, and as though her openness has a smell, heads turn towards and linger on her. She once more letting go.
That's from Moon Sugar, Angela Meyer reading. The Berlin scene, I will never understand why people take so many drugs. My biggest idol, Frank Zappa, was very outspoken against it. We
Mm.
have people here in the room that take drugs. I'm not going to name any names. No, no, they're of medical nature and they do wonderful things. But now, I was joking a little bit with the drugs trigger, although this could be a serious issue. But what is more serious, I think, in the book is the fact that a major plot point has to do with suicide. So
Yeah.
what were your thoughts about writing about this? The worries, what kind of discussions went on, what kind of thoughts went on, you
I
know,
guess my
how do I approach it? Could I get this wrong?
my yeah, of course. And my main worry, and this is, I guess it's a spoiler, but I do want to give it, which is to say, um, no queer people were harmed in the making of this book. I hope that that's enough for people to understand. Um, and it's hinted at quite early on that not all is not as it seems. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. So I think in having that as a plot point,
Hmm.
um, it was only that it had to be something that um, the main characters Miller and Kyle could become suspicious of it actually
Right.
having occurred. Um, and yeah, so far people have in feedback on the book seemed okay with that. So um,
No, I think,
yeah,
and even I think it's done very well in the sense how it depicts the how people reacted. I mean, in my personal life, I had a brother of a good friend of mine committed suicide
mm,
at age it was mid-20s, and it was
yeah,
a similar thing of someone who just embraced life a hundred
mm,
percent, and really this kind of stereotypical person where you were really like this can't be. right?
Yeah,
If you look
it's
at
so
10
sad.
friends of mine, I would have the 9 others be much more likely for whatever reason, but not this person.
Mm.
Um, and in your book, it's that kind of person,
Yeah.
just sort of brimming with life. Uh, did you have an experience like that in your life?
Yeah, I uh, it was someone in my high school, so very young. Um, and we weren't close friends, but we knew each other, and obviously that it impacted everybody in our year. Um,
Mm.
and I think, like, over my own mental health journey, there's been a lot of ups and downs, and um, yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's, I guess it's something that the impulse is something that has affected people very close to me, and they all are, would be described very differently in terms of, yeah, whether they were a person who was full of life. I think that uh, you, there's no exact profile of someone who does take their own life.
Yeah, yeah,
There are
exactly. Because
yeah, so many different reasons. There are so many, um, yeah, there are so many ways a person can be affected that would lead to that point.
and also,
Um,
I just
yeah,
realized when we say often, as I just did, brimming with life, I mean, it I think what I got reminded also by reading your book is that we really don't know who anybody is. We really
mm,
don't. And when we say someone is brimming with life and look how this person is just so, so happy, uh, folks, spoiler alert, don't confuse uh, the outside with the inside. We
yeah,
are
and I think
also conditioned to act a certain way in social settings.
it's so. Yeah, it's there are a lot of people who have a kind of very, I guess it's often described as like an A-type personality, where they're very high functioning and very together as far as the
Yeah,
world around them is concerned, and even people close to them would not know that they were suffering in some ways. And I think that's those kind of people that end up being described as full of life is, um, they are very good at masking, and they don't even mean to a lot of times, just the way that, yeah, they're just they're high functioning,
high functioning.
and
Yep.
yeah, yeah, and they don't, um, yeah, whether they're conditioned to be that way or it's a sort of personality aspect, but they don't know how to perhaps bring the inner suffering to the outside in a way that they are comfortable with, or that they can share that in a way that's going to help them to heal, I suppose.
It's also important not to confuse somebody else's outsides with your own insides. When you feel
Yep.
like, oh, wow, this person is so much happier than I am, and I seem to be, um, this stuff seems to be affecting me so much more than this other person. What's wrong with me? And like this is a great way of putting it. It just could just mean that the other person is uh better and yeah, a high functioning adjusted
Yes.
actor in what is generally required to or or seen as
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah. And then there's also, I guess, a personality type of people who are just very generous towards others, and so
Yes,
they would always they would never want to complain, so they would just keep things inside, and in the interest of allowing the other person to be seen and heard. And those are also people often who, um, perhaps are suffering more than you would realize, because they're more concerned in the moment of ensuring the other person is comfortable.
yes, that's a great
um,
point. That's a good
and I
point.
think actually Kyle, a little bit is like that in this book. But Miller can kind of tell straight away when that she can kind of see through it a little bit, because he's being a little bit too self-effacing and a little bit, and she's like, "Come on." Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Stranger is saying perhaps the greater part of humanity leads leads lives of quiet desperation. Very well
yeah,
put. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And God, this is like I was saying earlier, I was listening to this German public radio report. They do excellent reportage. But what annoyed me about the piece about people who were like social butterflies before the pandemic and now they have difficulties going
mm,
back to parties. What annoyed me, and people know my work with people with disabilities and which involves also isolation. I've done several movies about this topic. Uh, you know, Nobody talks about people who didn't even have any options,
mm,
primarily because of mobility impairment to play a part like that in the first place.
yes,
And again, but we talked about this. Now we're going to come to a early close today because Penelope needs attendance. And
yeah,
but I do want to mention because people ask me, and maybe the camera can pan to these paintings that are on these easels. These are AI paintings made by AI. It's all the rage these days. Of Marlene Dietrich, famous actress. David Bowie, everybody knows who he is, was, uh, and John Wayne on the other side, and they do play a role. And you mentioned humor earlier. The
yes,
book is very funny, and this is a real fun aspect of the book. The role of these three famous people
yes.
that they
Uh,
play. You don't have
yeah,
to spoil anything.
I won't
You
go
don't have
into it,
to.
but they may
Yeah,
be channeled in the book,
yeah.
in an interesting way.
Good. Okay, so final question. Are Is there such a thing as a benevolent billionaire?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you.
I
Right
think they're
answer, you get
tainted.
reinvited.
Yeah.
You
Thank you.
you will get reinvited because
Mm.
you are in quasi-communist territory here, at least as far as I'm concerned. Um, and this is a great aspect of your book as well because there is a person who seems well-meaning and is funding some research here. Um, Book ends on a great note, and it leaves a lot of food for thought when this person, this billionaire, Lisa, says, "Okay, I won't do certain things anymore, only for good." And we talked a little bit about this and pre-production of this show. Um, and Bill Gates always comes up as someone, oh yeah, but he's doing so much good with polio and stuff like that. And I'm not going to go too much off a tangent, but look up what Bill Gates and the whole school reform thing, uh, what impact that had on framing issues in terms of public education. And it's a prime example of a billionaire having sort of a pet project,
Mm,
investing a lot of money in something that really fundamentally changed the perception of what public education should be. And there was a report after this experiment initiated by the Gates Foundation that found that there was, nothing really worked in their proposal, but the fallout of this sort of pet project um, is a net negative. So
mm.
after you read Angela's book, then read some good articles about what happened there in case you crave for a benevolent
It's just
billionaire.
yeah, the
Yeah,
power being in the hands of individuals rather than, yeah,
right. But I think I
collective.
mean, I understand the
And
human
individuals
need.
tainted by money. Yeah.
Right, and even and again, it's just ultimately it's undemocratic that one person can dictate policy. I think that that's
Yeah.
at the core of the issue. But I understand that we like, and again, this goes back to how we're conditioned. I think we're conditioned to wanting a a good a sugar daddy. There we go.
Yeah,
Someone
yeah.
who is really so good, natured, hearted, and so full of talent, and also the pockets are so full of cash that he will solve all of our problems.
It's a
Yeah.
fantasy. There you go.
Warren Buffett is a terrible person. Sorry, Shiloh, to pop your bubble. Is that, or I don't know if that's an adequate term here. English is not my
Mhm.
first language. I highly encourage the book after you read Moon Sugar. Read the book Monopolized by a wonderful American journalist, David Dane, who works for The Prospect. And we had him on the show here together with Cory Doctorow last year. The book Monopolized is amazing. And there is a chapter on Warren Buffett and sort of Warren Buffett's carefully, carefully crafted public image of the cuddly millionaire. There's a lot of
Mm.
problems with him as well. But yeah, Angela, thank you very much. Can
Thank
you
you. It's
write?
been
Last question.
wonderful to
Can
be here.
I keep talking over you? I apologize. It's terrible.
Sure.
The last question. What can you write at all now with the baby? Are you adjusting somehow? Do you put yourself under pressure of
I
producing, or can you say, no, I'm completely fine. I just had a great book out. I don't
I
need to be in the
I do
hamster wheel.
feel I always feel that it's partly pressure, but it's also just the desire to write, is always there. Always getting ideas. And I do have things underway that I'd like to be working on, but yes, it is much more difficult. But it's not just having a baby, it's the fact I'm working full time and have a
Yeah.
baby. It's like it's the double whammy. So I did
Angela, we're
have
so naive here. We always believe that authors, they live this, the artist life. They're rolling in cash, not
yeah,
like
no way.
Warren Buffett cash, but kind of Warren Buffett adjacent. All the while, they sleeping till 3, then they smoke a little bit of whatever drug, and then they stare into the clouds, and then inspiration showers over them, and they just then put that somewhere, and then the publisher comes and puts
Yeah,
it
that'd be
out. So
nice.
that's not how it
Um,
works, I guess.
no, no, and I think since Penelope was born, I've been trying to write just an hour on Saturdays, but
Ah, yeah.
now because I teach, I've had marking to do on the weekends, so it just is it's not happening. Um, anyway, I'm writing ideas into my phone late at night, so that's something. I'm
That's
thinking
it.
about writing, and that is partly writing. Thinking, making
Absolutely.
decisions. Yeah,
And just collecting ideas, and then when the time comes, it's one of the biggest
yeah,
adjustment is to just grab the hour when you have it. I guess
yeah.
when the kid sleeps and stuff, and
That's
that
right.
is an acquired skill of just jumping
Yeah,
at that.
you have to really actively not prioritize other things like
Yeah.
housework. You have to be like that can wait, but it's
Yeah, yeah.
hard at times. Yeah.
You live in a pigsty. That's great.
Well, there is
Send us a picture of your
certainly
kitchen
equal
right now,
share of
Angela.
labor in my house, so
Ah,
it's
yeah,
okay.
right.
Yeah, I'm very lucky.
That is very good. A good modern man who can
Yeah,
change diapers. Now, folks, I'm going to wrap it. Angela, thank you very much. Again, it's a wonderful book. Please check out Angela's website, uh, literaryminded.com.au, I guess it is.
I think it is. Yeah.
Is it
.au. Yep.
.com.au? Yes. And the book club is happening every Wednesday since April 2020, over 3 years. Every Wednesday here in
Amazing.
Second Life, 12 o'clock. Show is produced by yours truly. Camera, sound, Isabel Sharon. Avatar is made by Bespoke Caravan. This avatar, I think it was made by Ruby. Research by Shyla and Monkey. Location is always second.life/book club. You put that URL in there, and then you go in world, and the teleporter will put you out at the required place. Draxtor.com/SL book club for feedback, newsletter, and recommendations. Second Life Book Club every Wednesday, 12 o'clock. We have a tip jar here on the left side, right in front of John Wayne. If you have Linden dollars, please feed this tip jar Linden dollars Don't feed it to John Wayne, feed it to the tip jar. Go straight to the volunteer staff. You can also donate if you like. There's a Ko-Fi link in the YouTube description. Please donate there if you like the show. Also, you can consider becoming a member of the YouTube channel. We have two advertisers on the program who sponsor us with Linden's and Product. Bespoke Caravan, makers of fantastical avatars, absolutely amazing. Currently working on a follow up of my Avatars Made in Second Life video, and that's called Comics Made in Second Life. There's a guy out of Panama who makes comics based on these avatars. Really cool. It's coming out next month. The other sponsor is the Black Forest board games. You know these board games, they're amazing. Arden Schwartzman makes all sorts of things, but he makes completely playable board games. Some of them are rip-off adjacent. Well, this is a chess game, okay? I don't know if there's a copyright on it, but um, Arden does not only make versions of existing board games, he comes up with completely new board games that are just totally awesome. So check him out. It's the Black Forest. Check him out on SL Marketplace. Next week, we have a free for all at 11 a.m. because I have a doctor's appointment the next day. Please note 11 a.m., not 12 p.m. Free for all. That means you can read. You can read if you're a writer, read from something, work in progress if you like. If you're a reader, bring your favorite book. I know the Resistor mentioned he wanted to read from Philip K. Dick. Please message me and we'll put that into the calendar. I see Stranger here in the audience. If Stranger wants to read a little bit Thomas Pynchon, please do. Little bit Gravity's Rainbow. Thank you, everybody, and
Thank you.
thank you,
Thanks, Drax. Wonderful
thank you,
chat.
Angela. Thank you, Penelope was so quiet.
She was. Sleepy baby. Thank you.